This is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of the Christ School of Theology. We're talking today about Immanuel Kant, continuing a series of lectures on the critique of pure reason, which of course had profound influence upon the history of theology. And we'll be pointing that out as we proceed in these lectures. Last time I talked about how mathematics was comprised of a priori synthetic statements, right? Now Kant wants to argue as well that just as we have to appeal to space and time as necessary conditions for mathematical knowledge, I didn't really unpack that well, but in geometry, of course, you have to appeal to intuition, but not experience, but you have to appeal to intuition to know that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. You have to appeal to space. So in numbers, and he has as transcendental time determinations, 7 plus 5 is equal to 12, finally gets unpacked in terms of time. So time is a condition for the possibility of the synthetic judgment that 7 plus 5 is equal to 12. Okay, just take my word for it. So in natural science, just as an appeal to space and time are the necessary conditions for mathematical knowledge, an appeal to concepts, a batch of concepts, he says, is a necessary condition for scientific knowledge. Now you're saying, well, what on the Sam's Hill are you talking about? Well, here is what I'm trying to say. Hume had launched a devastating critique. If you remember our good friend Newton, right, our good friend Newton, he had said that celestial mechanics, physics, are comprised of statements that are universal, that is, they apply everywhere, and necessary. That force is equal to mass times acceleration just doesn't happen to be the case. It must be the case, right? So you have a modal force to the laws of nature. This must be so. They govern things, right? Hume points out that, well, every time he looks around, he sees that, well, over here force is equal to mass times acceleration, over here it's equal to mass times acceleration, over here it's equal to mass times acceleration. But just because I've observed this to be the case 3 times, I don't know if it's the case the 4th time, right? Because I can always come up with an experiment that shows that force in this particular instance is not equal to mass times acceleration. This is the celebrated problem of induction. Yes, I'm disappearing from your view. I'm back. Problem of induction for Hume. How do we know that the future will ever resemble the past? And if we don't know for sure that the future is going to resemble the past, how can we ever come up with Newton's view that certain laws of nature are universal and necessary, right? The best we can say is, well, it's happened 27 billion times before, but I don't know, tomorrow could be different. You just never know, right? Now, of course, Kant can't stand this. I mean, he's German after all, and he wants to save Newton. He wants to save the universality and the necessity of scientific judgments. And when he talks about experience, Kant is really talking about the empirical order, including the batch of laws of nature that are both necessary and universal. So let's take, for instance, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Newton would have said, well, this is a law of nature. If he talked about it, he would have said that. Our good friend Hume would say, well, you know, we go out and we see it every time we look, water's boiling at 212 degrees at, let's say, sea level, right? Under constant pressure and conditions, constant height. Kant is going to want to try to save the universality and necessity, but he's going to know that the way to save it is not in the old-fashioned way of Newton, that it's part of the objective order, because Hume's right, of course. You just go out and you observe every time. So how is it that there is universality and necessity to the judgments of science when we can never actually pierce the veil and know that there is an objective order that necessitates this. Hume's right, after all. All we have is experience, and we have one thing after the other. I look this time, it's this way. I look this time, and it's this way. What Kant does is he tries to say that the universality and the necessity of things are imposed by Verstand, reason, the organizational activities of the understanding, Verstand, not reason, but the understanding, der Verstand. I said reason, I meant to say understanding. It's a fundamental error. They shoot guys for this in Kantian scholarship if you mix up Verstand and Vernunft. Verstand, the understanding, and of course Kant doesn't want to talk about the mind here. He says, I'm no mere physiologist of the mind, he writes in reply to a book review of the first critique, and then he tries to write the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason to try to take care of that and make sure that he's properly doing metaphysics and not talking about the mind. But there is there is an organizing activity that we bring to experience, right? So what he wants to say is that the organizational activity brought to experience, comprising experience, right, is what makes it the case that water boiling at 212 degrees is universal and necessary. Now, I've had enough Kant to know that anybody who talks about Kant can always be shot by a Kant scholar for saying things too simply. In fact, I had a teacher, a Kant teacher, who would call one book Kant for Kinder, because it's not complicated enough and it's too simple. Okay, this is a lecture for Kinder. Okay, this is not a deep Kant lecture. This is a lecture for theologians who want to know something about Kant. Okay? All right? All right. So, he's going to argue that there is a Copernican revolution. The mind doesn't find an order that's out here and record it, the order being impressed upon the mind, but that the order that the mind finds, if you will, is a joint product of the cognitional activity of mind and whatever's outside of it, right? So the thing revolves around the mind. I hate to use that word because that's not exactly how Kant talks, but I'm using it. The thing revolves around us instead of us around the thing. Now, I hope no one's confused by this because it will all become clearer in this little series of talks about Kant for Kinder. So let's talk next time about space and time, and then we'll get into everybody's favorite, the transcendental aesthetic, and then the transcendental analytic. I'm Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of the Institute of Lutheran Theology's Christ School of Theology, and I'll be right back with you. Thanks.